Hey guys, welcome back. Today I wanted to do a video on Tyr and by extension Fenrir, because the two kind of go hand in hand with the same stories, so I'm going to be touching on both of those today and telling the story of the binding of Fenrir, because that is an integral part of both of their stories and it is one of the best stories that we have of Tyr. So starting off with Tyr. Tyr is one of the oldest gods, and he is specifically concerned with the formalities of war, contracts, and the law, hence why he's often called the god of justice. Generally, it's believed that Tyr was the Germanic version of the Indo-European Skyfather, whose position as chief of the gods was later usurped by Odin, who then became known as the chief of the gods, or the All-Father. Being a warlock god and being connected with the law and justice and of contracts, my personal interpretation is that he kind of emphasizes the need for level-headedness and diplomacy even in times of war. So instead of just rushing off and without a plan or strategy, there's other ways to approach problems, and I think Tyr encompasses that aspect of war times, where it's, yes, there's sometimes need for brutal conflict, but you should also try other avenues and methods for conflict resolution, such as making treatises or coming to a diplomatic solution for a specific problem. If that fails, then you turn to more brutal problem-solving methods. The most commonly told story of Tyr's birth places him as a son of Odin and of an unnamed mother. However, others have referenced him as being of Jotun descent, specifically from the union of Hyrem and Hrod. Other traits that are often associated with Tyr include honor and self-sacrifice, both of which are demonstrated very well in the story of the binding of Fenrir. In my personal interpretation of the story, I believe that Tyr had a great respect for Fenrir, if not a type of friendship between the two of them, because Tyr was the only one who approached Fenrir without fear, and after the fact he appears very somber, not joining in any celebrations after Fenrir is bound. He doesn't rejoice in the binding. I mean, yes, he just lost his hand, but I feel like it's more than just, oh no, I've lost my hand. It's, I just betrayed someone who saw me as a friend. And as somebody who places such a high emphasis on honor and not breaking oaths, I believe that's kind of a conflict within him during this story. So overall, Tyr is most famously associated with the binding of Fenrir, and the story begins when Odin learns of the prophecy of Ragnarok and his own death by Fenrir, and so he goes to round up Loki's children from Angrboda, and he designates Jormungandr. He casts him down to encircle Midgard. Hel, he gives dominion over the dead in Hel. But Fenrir, he decides to keep close in Asgard to watch over him as he grows. It was said that Fenrir would grow large enough that he would be able to devour even the sun itself. During this time, only Tyr was brave enough to approach the wolf, feeding and playing with him daily. Eventually, the other gods grew too fearful of Fenrir's might and agreed that he must be bound for their safety. At first, the gods presented the binding as a game, as a way for Fenrir to show off his strength. The great wolf gladly played along and snapped the first binding with ease. Next, they tried an even stronger binding, which they said was an opportunity to prove the wolf's strength was even greater. This time, Fenrir struggled for a moment, but ultimately broke free. At this point, the gods were growing even more fearful and desperate, so they turned to the dwarves for a solution. As the dwarves are the greatest smiths in the 9 realms, they had hoped that they would have a solution that could permanently bind Fenrir. So the dwarves forged Gleipnir, bindings stronger than any had seen, even as they appeared as thin as a ribbon. Gleipnir was constructed from 6 things: the sound of a cat's footfall, the roots of a mountain, a woman's beard, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird, and a bear's sensibility. Legend has it that because these things were used in the creation of Gleipnir, that they can no longer be found in the world today. Having already been bound twice, Fenrir wasn't keen on being bound the 3rd time. So when the gods approached him once more, he asked that one of them place their hand in his jaws as a show of good faith. Only Tyr, the oldest friend of the wolf, stepped forward, placing his right hand in the wolf's jaws. At this point, Tyr made an oath that should Fenrir be unable to break free, the gods would untie him and declare him the strongest being in the 9 realms. Upon hearing this from Tyr, his only friend and a god renowned for his honor, Fenrir had no worry of being betrayed. Once Gleipnir was tied around him, he struggled and struggled, but was unable to break free. As the gods rejoiced and laughed and cheered, Fenrir realized that he'd been tricked, and closed his jaws sharply on Tyr's hand. Tyr was the only one who refused to take joy in the Great Wolf's pain. The gods then took Fenrir to an isolated place where he would stay bound and alone until Ragnarok. When he tried to lash out, the gods lodged a sword between his jaws, preventing them from closing. It is said that the drool that ran from his ever-open mouth even formed a great river. Eventually, though, the wolf will break free at Ragnarok, and he will devour the Allfather, eventually dying himself at the hands of Odin's son Vidar. Until then, however, the great wolf waits, seething over his betrayal at the hands of the gods and the hand of his most trusted friend. So that story kind of emphasizes the importance of both honor and revenge. Because if you look at it from Tyr's standpoint, he wants what's best for the gods of Asgard, and the gods agree that binding Fenrir is ultimately the best thing for them. However, I believe Tyr appears conflicted because Fenrir never really posed a threat to him. In the story, they almost share kind of a friendship feel. Like, Fenrir does not believe that Tyr would ever do him any wrong. And so he trusts Tyr when he says that if he is unable to break the binds of Gleipnir, that the gods would untie him and everything would be fine. He has no fear of being betrayed. And seeing as Tyr is the epitome of honor and he embodies all things honorable, I really don't believe that Fenrir had any worry of being bound until Ragnarok. So the pain of betrayal that Fenrir feels in this story, I think is something that anyone who has been betrayed or slighted by somebody that they once trusted can empathize with. While it might not be to the same degree that Fenrir has experienced betrayal, I think that's something that everyone can kind of understand. You trusted somebody, and even if they didn't mean to hurt you for a bad reason, I mean, it doesn't lessen the effect on you as a person. So that's why I believe that both Tyr and Fenrir can kind of be conflicting characters, especially in this story where it highlights their dynamic. It's also kind of telling that Tyr makes an oath, essentially, saying that the gods would untie Fenrir, and it's essentially a lie, because he knows that the gods have no intention of unbinding Fenrir should he successfully be bound. So that also creates an interesting duality between the importance of keeping your word and of personal honor, and having and times where it's necessary to tell a lie for what you believe is the ultimate good. Whether it's the ultimate good or not is up to interpretation. Maybe I'm reading too much into it because of my personal fondness for Loki, but I think that kind of emphasizes an interesting aspect of right and wrong within the Nordic culture, whereas sometimes it's necessary to lie, and I don't think that anyone would hold it against Tyr. I mean, obviously Tyr is heralded as one of the greatest of the gods, but when you hold honor at such a high pedestal, but don't take note that Tyr basically broke his own oath during this story, it's kind of an interesting aspect of things, because he embodies so much of that, but even he notices that it's necessary in this instance for him to essentially lie, which kind of goes along with Loki's way of looking at things, whereas sometimes it's necessary to lie to either get what you want or to produce an outcome that you believe is for the best. But going back to Fenrir, I think there's a lot of people who overlook him or don't give him a lot of honor, and some people don't really see him as a god, and it could be debated if he's technically a god or not, but I feel like a lot of people should be able to empathize with him, because truly, there's not really a story of him, aside from his binding, that shows him as an evil figure. I mean, truly, he didn't really do anything to slight the gods, aside from the prophecy of Ragnarok. But it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because had the gods not bound him and ignited that revenge need in him, would Ragnarok, or would Odin's death at his jaws have come about to begin with? So it's an interesting kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, and that's one of the most interesting things about Ragnarok, is a lot of the things that happen as Odin tries to prevent it actually fuel the fire of going towards it. It's a very interesting prophecy, and it's very interesting when you take into account Fenrir as a being, and if he really should be shunned, as a lot of people do. A lot of people fear him, and a lot of people think that because he is a child of Loki that he's demonized, and I think a lot of that comes from the Christian retelling of these stories that kind of paint Loki and his children as evil figures in the pantheon, and I don't necessarily think that's true, because if you see, I mean, if you hold honor at a high pedestal, like I said, and that's like the epitome, Tyr broke that. So what does that make Tyr, in effect, if he went against the thing that you're supposed to hold the highest in order to bind Fenrir as an act of betrayal? So it's interesting when you really think about it, and you think about good and evil, there's no real clear line, because everybody is working towards a specific goal, but the methods of getting to the goal of preventing Ragnarok, which in and of itself is impossible, the methods are a bit dubious sometimes. And that's why I think that you can't really put the gods into categories of this god is good, this god is evil. Odin has done things, as I've said in my video on Odin, Odin has done things that most people would agree are a little shady, but nobody is going to deny that Odin is a god that deserves respect and honor. That's my interesting interpretation of the binding of Fenrir, and how both Fenrir and Tyr can be looked at in the context of that story, and as deities equally, because in my personal interpretation, I do see Fenrir as a being that is deserving of respect and of admiration, and I think that he's really a raw embodiment of primal strength. There's really nothing truly evil about Fenrir. I mean, if anyone has been betrayed by somebody that they trusted, I think that he's completely right in his feelings for, I mean, it's on a grand cosmological scale of world destruction, but truly, I mean, he was betrayed in a terrible way and bound until Ragnarok. And I think if anyone was in that situation, they would feel a similar way if they had the power to get the revenge that they seek. Going back to Tyr, I think some ways to honor him in your daily life are to hold yourself accountable for your actions, to seek to be as honorable and as just as possible. But you should also acknowledge that there are times when sometimes you have to go against your instincts of wanting to be the epitome of justice. There are some instances where you might need to lie. I mean, certainly if your wife comes out wearing a pair of jeans that, just don't fit quite like they did last year, you're not gonna go, no honey, you've gained 5 pounds. Don't do that. You're gonna be, yeah, honey, looks great. Don't tell your wife that she's gained 5 pounds. That's a very minuscule example, but there's always times that you have to lie, and if lying itself is completely dishonorable, then everybody is a dishonorable person. And I don't think that's an accurate interpretation of how we should hold people accountable. So when it comes to, like, big promises and things like that, yes, of course, hold true to your word, but there's gonna come a time when we're all gonna have to... This is my Loki coming out. There's gonna come a time when we're all gonna have to lie about something, whether it's large or small. Usually most people will only have to tell white lies to get through their day, but there's always going to be a time when you're going to have to lie about something, and I think Tyr recognizes that and displays that sometimes it is completely alright to do that. So to honor him, I think it would be a good way to try to embody that in your daily life, while holding yourself accountable, but also recognizing that nobody is the epitome of honor, and that even the god of justice needs to tell a lie every now and then. My Loki is really coming out as you have to lie now. So yeah, and for Fenrir, I think a little empathy towards him as a deity, if you see him as a deity or just as a powerful being. I think there has to be some level of respect there for him, and an empathy for the struggle that he went through and the betrayal that he felt after being bound and essentially lied to. So, that is my interpretation of Tyr Fenrir and the story of Fenrir's binding. I hope this video was a little bit helpful. I specifically wanted to do Tyr because I know someone who is looking to begin working with Tyr, so I'd hoped that this video would be a little bit helpful towards them, and hopefully it is helpful towards you as well. If you have any questions about Tyr or about how Tyr fits into the lore of the gods and all of that, I hope that this video was informative to you, and if you have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I will get to them when I can, hopefully soon. I actually have a schedule set out, so every Wednesday, because today's Tuesday, I'm recording this. Tuesday! Recording this on Tuesday! Fantastic. So yeah, this will be coming out on Wednesday for you. I should probably release this on Tuesday, but maybe it'll come out on Tuesday, or maybe it'll come out on Wednesday. But I'm gonna try to do a video like this every Wednesday, and then I'm going to do 2 gaming videos a week. One on Saturday, I'm gonna release it, and then one on Mondays. Make your Mondays a little brighter in Skyrim. And then, of course, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I will be starting a playthrough of that when that comes out, and I think that will be an interesting thing to talk about, because I'm very interested to see how that game incorporates the gods into it, for one thing. I really want to see how they interpret that, but also the culture. I want to see how that works out in-game. Yeah, I want to do a playthrough on that, because I wish I could have done a playthrough on God of War, the newest God of War 4 that took place in Scandinavia. I'm not exactly sure where they placed it in Scandinavia, but I know I had a lot of fun watching playthroughs of that multiple times and trying to interpret all the runes, and they did a really great job on that game. But yeah, so I will be doing that, and once again, if you have any questions or any videos that you would like to see me make on topics of the gods, feel free to leave those below, and until the next time, bye! He asked that one of them place their hand in his... Having already been bound twice, Fenrir was not keen on being bound a third time. Thank you, my dog. Having already been bound twice, Fenrir... My dog just does not want me to get through this.